The history of rock and roll is filled with albums that were commercial failures when they were originally released but later became cult classics. Bands like the Velvet Underground or the Stooges are good examples of that phenomenon, and many 60s garage bands that were featured on compilations such as Nugget's Pebbles or Back from the Grave are also good examples of that. But there are still many albums from the 60s that have never gotten the recognition they deserve. CQ by The Outsiders is one of those records. The album has been reissued a few times over the years, and it has become a cult classic among many enthusiasts of psychedelia from the 60s. But this record still remains unknown to many music lovers around the world. In this video, we're going to take a look at the history of The Outsiders, and the history of this psychedelic gem called CQ. Let's begin. Not to be confused with the American band of the same name, The Outsiders were formed in Amsterdam in 1964. The group consisted of Wally Tax on lead vocals, Ron Splinter on lead guitar, Apple Rammers on bass and keyboards, Tom Krabendam on rhythm guitar, and Lendert Bush on drums. In his book Unknown Legends of Rock and Roll, music critic Richie Unterberger wrote that The Outsiders could issue a serious claim for consideration as the finest rock band of the 60s to hail from a non-English speaking nation. And I'd certainly agree with that. The group was very influenced by British bands such as the Stones, the Yardbirds, and especially the Pretty Things, who enjoyed bigger popularity in the Netherlands than in their native Britain. Bands like the Pretty Things and the Outsiders spoke to a rebellious youth in the Netherlands that was reacting against the conservatism of their parents' generation. But the Outsiders were far from mere copyists of British bands. The group mixed their tough and edgy sound with other influences such as the Byrds, Tim Hardin, Jacques Brel, and European folk music. And the group had a truly unique signature sound that was always very recognizable. Their period of greatest popularity in the Netherlands was from 1965 to 67. And The Outsiders, perhaps more than any other Dutch band from that period, exemplified the so-called Nederbeat sound, a raw take on rock and roll created in the Netherlands in the wake of the British invasion. The band's unkempt image and their extremely long hair was also quite controversial at the time. In the late 60s and early 70s, it wasn't uncommon to see groups with this kind of look. But in 1965 and 1966, this was quite extreme and unusual. And another unusual thing about The Outsiders was that unlike many bands from that era, they never recorded any covers. Between 1965 and 1968, the band recorded 13 singles and managed to score 5 top 10 hits in the Netherlands. Their first single was released in October 1965. At the time, the band's popularity was relegated to the Netherlands, but Touch, their fifth single, has become one of their most well-known tunes due to its inclusion on several compilations over the years. The track was even featured on the second Nuggets box set.
We'll touch. Yeah, touch your hand.
In the Netherlands, Touch reached number 6 in the charts. And the success of several of their singles and their reputation as a great live band granted them opportunities to open for many leading British groups such as the Stones and the Pretty Things among many others. Their eponymous debut album, which was released in 1967, featured one side of studio recordings and another side comprised of live material. The sound of the LP was quite ahead of its time, and it could definitely be described as a precursor of punk. One of the highlights of the live side of the LP is a song called Afraid of the Dark, which starts off like a sort of proto-goth tune with a dark and spooky vibe.
Them old sky, it's gold and black.
And ends up sounding almost like a hardcore punk recording from the 80s. The studio side also features plenty of highlights. The song Won't You Listen almost sounded like the sort of material that bands like Motorhead started recording later in the late 70s. The album sold quite well, and the compilation called Storybook, which featured several of their singles, was also quite successful. The single Summer Is Here was a huge hit during the summer of 1967.
Summer is here, and you're so near. Let's know that you're mine.
However, after the Summer of Love, many Dutch bands, including the Outsiders themselves, fell from commercial favor. The song Don't You Worry About Me which was released as a single in November 1967, only managed to reach 32 in the charts, and the commercial decline caused frictions within the band. These frictions resulted in Apple Rammers and Tom Krabendam leaving the group. Frank Beek was recruited to play bass and keyboards, and the band became a quartet. In hopes of building interest in the band, the Outsiders attempted various publicity stunts such as staging a haircut for lead singer Wally Tax on Dutch television. The silly publicity stunts alienated many of their fans, who felt that the Outsiders were losing their edge and their rebellious attitude. In 1968, Relax Records was absorbed by Polydor, who released the Outsiders' third LP, CQ. Just like many bands from that era, the group's music got more psychedelic and experimental, although the Outsiders never lost their tough and edgy sound. The album was recorded during the summer of 1968 at GTB Studios in The Hague and the Soundpush Studios in Blaricum. For the first time, the group had the luxury of uninterrupted studio time. The Outsiders insisted on producing their own record and barring anyone from the booth except their sound engineer. This sort of creative freedom was seldom granted, but the band capitalized on it. In an interview shortly after the release of the album, lead singer Wally Tax said,
"Now we take our time to record. A few years ago we used to rush in the studio and cut a song as quickly as possible, and then back home. That was it. But the music scene is changing fast, and so are we."
The album featured the group merging proto-punk sounds with spacey psychedelia and folk rock influences. And the Outsiders alternated rocking songs with gentle numbers, all dominated by a strange psychedelic feel. The title of the album, CQ, was an expression used by radio amateurs painstakingly scanning airwaves for new stations. The record took 6 months to finish, and all the care the band put both in composing and in recording it is evident. The album starts with Misfit, one of the toughest songs the group ever recorded, and a song that both musically and lyrically wouldn't sound out of place in a punk album from the late 70s.
We all know just what you are, and how come you are what you are, and why it just ain't possible to turn you on.
Frank Beek's obsessive bass lines are one of the highlights of the song. Things start to get really psychedelic with the second track, Sarah.
Have you ever seen my face?
The song features the group experimenting with exotic instruments and displaying influences of European folk music. The track has a weird, spooky vibe with a strange reverb effect that can be heard on many songs from the album. The weirdness continues with the title track, CQ. The song is reminiscent of the sort of material that Pink Floyd were putting out during that period. The Outsiders had played with Pink Floyd in 1967, and they were no strangers to the psychedelic experimentation of Syd Barrett and company. CQ is a sonic experiment about a person who's desperately trying to establish a radio contact and asking if someone is receiving him. The whole song has a sort of post-apocalyptic vibe, and it fittingly ends with the sound of a bomb exploding. The following song is one of the highlights of the album. Daddy Died on Saturday is a terrifying story of murder perpetrated by a jealous man.
Bought a poisoned sugar lump at the cafe in the slum. Put it in the old man's tea and waited patiently.
The chord sequence is reminiscent of bands such as The Who, and the song is a great example of the signature recognizable sound of the Outsiders, with Wally Tax's calm approach to singing standing in contrast with the electric and powerful sound of the backing. The album intelligently alternates short pieces with longer tracks.
It seems like nothing's gonna come my way today.
The first side of the album ends with one of the most demented songs on the record. Doctor features distorted vocals and an explosive fuzz guitar freakout. It's a perfect mix of proto-punk sounds and acid rock, psychotropic madness at its best. starts with Man on the Dune, a song which is at times reminiscent of the anarchic rhythm and blues material of the group's early days.
Days changing darkness into light. The sun replaced the moon and dawn the night. Soon the sun will wander and the night is gone to another
The
land.
song, however, also proves that the Outsiders had evolved beyond that early period in their career.
The man is rising from the dune. 'Cause the birds start singing out of June.
Another short song, The Bear, is the perfect bridge between Man on the Dune and Happyville. Happyville is another track which is slightly reminiscent of the group's earlier material.
Miss Red, you're going out of your mind. Up and down, you're doing fine. Your bony knees penetrate to my chest.
And just like Man on the Dune, the song seems to merge the band's earlier sound and the more advanced approach to music that they had already developed by 1968.
I don't mind your enthusiasm. I don't mind your wild orgasm. I don't mind
Your Everything on Earth is another definitive highlight of the album.
lost my sense of time. The face in the mirror doesn't look like mine.
It's a gorgeous tender track with a fantastic guitar dominating the entire track, and a truly heartfelt vocal performance by Wally Tax.
Did I tell you how much I love you? The singer's song says, that's what it says.
Another short track serves as a perfect bridge to another excellent song. I Love You Number 2 offers yet another heartfelt vocal performance by Wally Tax.
I learned a lot about you. Bad times I had without you. My state of mind in blue.
The song, with its slightly jazzy chords and weird percussion, sounds unlike anything else from the album. And it gives way to the last track from the LP, Prison Song.
Today I see that lovely face again.
Prison Song is the story of a man who comes out of prison and finds his woman in bed with another man. Overwhelmed by his emotions, he shoots her and runs away in a confused state. The song is told in the first person and makes the character's emotions come to life, the tension as he approaches the prison door to exit.
I hesitate, facing the iron door.
The overwhelming sensation when he's finally free.
I'm free, yeah!
The joy of going back home to see his woman.
I climbed the stairs of the house that I used to live in.
The pain when he sees her with another man and understands what's happened while he was in prison.
I realized what happened during the time I've been away. But I took my pistol.
The shot, the heart pounding, and the despair of the escape.
I gotta run. I gotta run, yeah. I gotta run.
CQ was released in September 1968. The album, with its unique cover art by Anton van der Gulik, got excellent reviews in the press. But unfortunately, Polydor failed to promote the album properly. The initial pressing was reportedly a mere 500 copies. A few months later, in early 1969, Do You Feel Alright was released as a single. The track was recorded during the sessions for the album but was eventually not included on the record.
Couldn't we do things better than before? Son, I promise we'll do things your way.
Despite critical acclaim, the single also went pretty much unnoticed. The lack of interest in the band prompted the Outsiders to break up shortly after the release of the single. In an interview several years later, lead singer Wally Tax declared that he felt that the Outsiders were deliberately put aside by Polydor in favor of Golden Earring, who were considered to be Polydor's #1 group. Original pressings of the album have become really expensive collector's items. But thankfully, CQ has been reissued several times over the years, and there are also a couple of compilations out there featuring outtakes and demos from the record. Despite the fact that few people realized it in 1968, CQ was a landmark album for the Dutch music scene, and the crowning achievement for one of Holland's greatest bands. Back in the 60s, the success of The Outsiders was largely relegated to their home country, but the quality of their music has resulted in the group finding renewed popularity with psychedelic and garage rock enthusiasts all over the world. And CQ is a psychedelic masterpiece that deserves all of your attention.